You and I had two great teams in '05. We're standing on the field in Columbus before the game, and we're laughing because we know the team that wins this game's probably going to end up playing USC for the national championship because there's no playoffs. But I remember our conversation like it was yesterday. We've got the same jobs. They're just in different places. You got a passionate fan base. You got
That's
really
right.
great players around you. You got to do a great job evaluating. What was it like to go from Youngstown State to being the head coach at Ohio State?
You know, it was interestingly similar because we'd gotten to the point where we'd played in 6 national championship games, and if we had a year where we didn't play in the national championship, it was like, you know, we were horrible and how dare you lose a game, and so by the time we left Youngstown State, I had a good understanding that it's impossible to win enough. The expectations are crazy. Um, the fans think that things are like a video game or something. Uh, so, and I had been an assistant coach, for Coach Bruce at Ohio State, and he was a great coach and so forth. But we'd lose a game and it'd be like, you know, it's the worst thing in the world. So, but whether you were, at North Carolina or wherever you are, when you're looking inside the field, you don't even know how many people are there. When you're in the middle of the game, it could be at any place, and that's the fun of it.
And Coach, what do you remember about our game in '05?
I just remember Vince Young, man. And you guys had to do about an 80-some yard drive there at the end, and I just remember him. He hit a couple good passes, but then he had a run to the left, and it just happened to be toward our bench, and he was going down the field, and I'm thinking I was going to run out and see if I could tackle him because, but it was just a great atmosphere, great game, you dream about games that you wouldn't normally be a part of. Ohio State and Texas had not had, a whole bunch of history, and it was just 2 first-class teams. That was the best part. Clean, tough, talented. By the end of the year, we were pretty good, but at the beginning of the year, we weren't good enough.
Well, and you were deciding on quarterbacks at that time too, and we had Vince who'd come back after beating Michigan in the Rose Bowl, and you were trying to figure it out early. So we were lucky there. You got it figured out in 2006, so it wasn't good for us. And I can remember Ted Ginn. We tried to kick it away from him, and he was so fast that he'd run and catch it and still return it. Even I'd say, "Pooch it, get it away from him." Said we did. And he still caught it and nearly returned it for a touchdown. But in '06, I remember you ran the ball so well, and that's when they started running the clock. And you got the ball with 8 minutes left, and the game was over because you just ran it through us and ran down, and that was such a great game as well. And Colt McCoy had just started that one, and you were more established at quarterback. But you think, Coach, if we'd had the 12-team playoff, both those teams would have been in the playoff. They would have been highly seeded and had a chance to win the national championship instead of if you lose one, you're pretty much out if the other teams win going back through. And then the Fiesta Bowl was so good. It was just a great game. I remember I gave you Spurs before the game, and you gave me a Buckeye tree that we still have planted in North Carolina. We couldn't plant it in Texas.
Yep.
We figured it wouldn't live. There's not enough water. It's too hot to do that. But it was really, really fun.
Yep.
Coach, what do you?
It was a great game.
Wasn't it a great game? All three of them were. The second one, you just whipped our butt in Austin, so that was tougher as we look at it. But the fans all got along, and it's 2 great games. What is your feeling, Coach, with the College Football Playoff Committee? Coach Sark has said, do you play an Ohio State if you're Texas, or do you play a group of 6 team? And have a better chance to get in the playoffs. So are we going to lose these matchups until they decide that strength of schedule, even if you lose the game, is going to still put you in a position because you played the game to be up there, because either Texas or Ohio State's going to leave Austin really disappointed.
Yeah.
So how
Well,
do we keep playing those
but
games?
the good news now is that you can drop that game early in the year, and still, if you're really a good team and keep getting better, you've got a much better chance. When we were in 1AA, we didn't really worry about those September games, even if we, played up a little bit and dropped a game or whatever, or in our case, played the Mid-American teams, and those were toss-ups for us because we knew we just needed to get good enough to get into the playoffs, and then after that, all bets are off. Uh, I think, not only, the are we gonna lose those national matchups? I think that would be sad if we do. Um, I think the other thing is those conference championship games, sometimes you wonder about those because people know they're already in the playoffs and, all that stuff. But I think one day, Mac, that they're gonna get it down to a small enough group of teams where every game, is gonna be, it's gonna be a battle. You're gonna have some intersectional type things, and we probably won't have as many, 11-1 or 12-0 teams, kind of like the NFL doesn't, right? Because everybody they play. So I'm thinking before too long, uh, the whole pool of teams may shrink, and you might be able to solve the scheduling thing.
Yeah,
Jim, do you have
because I'm sorry, Bob, but Coach, Ohio State has to beat Michigan. Then they have to play for a conference championship. Texas has to beat A&M. Then they have to play for a conference championship. And
Yep. Yep.
people have to remember. I remember Steve Spurrier saying, "I'm not as worried about Florida State's I am the SEC championship game." They're worried about all of them, and that's the thing. Is
I was gonna say the
are we-
fans care about all of them.
They do. And are you going to start having players opt out of a conference championship game so they'll be more ready for the playoff, like the NFL?
Yeah.
But Bob, you were going to say something.
No,
Sorry.
I was just going to ask because you've done both. You've coached in the era where there was no playoff, and now you're kind of on the outside looking in as a fan of Ohio State. Do you have a preference? Do you like it one way or the other?
I've always been a playoff fan. I just think that you have to get the right, figure out the right way to do it. I thought we evolved pretty well in 1AA when we first started. It was 8 teams, and then they realized, man, there's a lot of good teams, and then we got to 16, and now they're at 24, and the best of the best, you can be 8-3, or maybe even 8-4, and maybe make a run. And so I've always been a believer because that's what we try to teach kids in life. You got to keep getting better in life. You're not everything's not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. Stuff's going to happen, but just keep trying to get better. Well, that was the most fun way to coach. Was 1AA was that we just said, hey, we just got to keep getting better, guys. Let's not. The world's not going to end. If we lose a ball game and so forth. It might end when we were at Ohio State if we lose to Michigan. But just like Ryan did, 2 years ago, he lost to Michigan, then went and ran the table. And so I'm a playoff fan. I just think that's the least of our problems, the playoffs. I think we got a lot of other problems.
And Coach, you've played 24. They're at 12. Big Ten seems to be wanting to go to 24. What would your number be?
The number of playoff teams?
Yes, the number of playoff teams for FBS.
I think it will depend upon when we get to the number of teams that are going to end up being at that highest level. I think that will determine it. Like we have 32 NFL teams, and I think 14 or something like that makes the playoffs, almost half. So let's pretend we're at 40 or 50. Maybe it is 24, maybe it ends up being 16. So much is determined by where are we with the TV contracts? When can you legally start doing what? Where are we in terms of this Senate bill and how is Congress going to insert itself? I think we're going to have a lot of interesting things come down the road here in the next, I hope, short while. I hope we don't wait too long. But in the meantime, like when Ryan and I talk a lot, the rules of engagement today are the rules of engagement. So you got to play by those. and that means you got to go out and raise NIL money, and you've got to live with talking to those agents, and there's so many difficult things those guys have to do. Mac, they don't have near as much fun as we had.
No, no, and you can tell that when you talk to him. Coach Ryan Day is an unbelievable man. I really like him, respect him, and what he stands for, and all he does outside of football, much less he and his family. Tell the Texas fans what they're going to see out of Ohio State this year.
Ohio State's a good-looking group. Now, I haven't been to practice as much with this new gig I have as I used to. The 1 year I was retired and I was free to do whatever I want and go to all my old coaches' teams, practices, and all that stuff, I was there every other Tuesday, and I felt like I had a good handle on the team in 24. I didn't get there as much in 25. I've only been to, I think, one spring practice and one fall practice here in 26. But it seems like every time I walk in the building, the players look more impressive. I mean, he's got a good-looking group of kids. And I tell you, the other thing that's very impressive to me is he's got really good kids. I mean, they're really good, solid kids, and I think that's one of the benefits of the fact that now they're getting a little bit of the compensation. Because Mack will tell you, most of the problems stemmed from the time when the guys just didn't have anything, and they were generating all that money, and they just didn't seem to think that was fair. And there were people chirping in their ear, "This isn't fair," and that's when you had issues. Now that they have a little bit of money in their pocket, they don't have that distraction. But boy, they seem to be a good group of kids. And I'll tell you this, and you guys know this better than I. They got a guy number 4, a receiver, Jeremiah Smith. I mean, he is. I'm not sure I've ever seen a guy like him. And I probably had 4 or 5 first-round receivers. Jeremiah's special.
And he's been special the last 2 years. It's pretty cool. We get to see him for 3 years in college football because he's been that good from the beginning of his career at Ohio State. I wanted to ask you about the quarterbacks because you think back 20 years ago, Vince Young, Troy Smith, Heisman Trophy winner. Now we're 20 years later. It's 2 elite quarterbacks again, and Julian Sayin and Arch Manning. I don't know how much you've gotten a chance to watch Arch Manning, but what are your thoughts on the 2 quarterbacks?
Well, I was at the game last year because Mac and I were chatting before the game, and I watched the game from the end zone, and you could see that was that first, tough, kind of like Colts' first game, when we played him in 06. That was his first time, with that magnitude of game and so forth, and you could see there was a little bit of indecision. You watched him down the rest of, later on in the year. I didn't see, every Texas game, but you watched him, as time went down, he looked a lot more decisive. Now, you guys watch him every day. Obviously, he's very talented. He can run it. He can throw it. But I've always felt that the number one thing that the quarterback had to do was make good decisions. And if you're indecisive, I don't care how talented you are, you're going to have a problem. He looked way more decisive at the end of the year. Now, we'll see. And your ability to be decisive in some ways is in direct proportion to how good the folks are you're going against. And we had a good defense last year. I think we had 4 guys picked in the first 11 or something silly in the NFL draft. But as I look at our defense, I think athletically we're as good as we've been. I'm not sure we'll be as experienced, as we've been.